Hey everyone, Nate Scott here, host of The Sneak. This isn't going to be a typical episode of our podcast. In fact, it's one we didn't plan on making at all. If you listened to our finale last time, quick note, if you haven't listened to the finale, basically none of this podcast will make any sense, so it's probably worth either going back to check it out, or you can just skip this, I guess. Anyway, if you did listen to the finale, you probably remember our note at the end that Jack Murphy actually passed away just a few days before we released the final episode. We wanted to provide an update with this episode to fill you all in on what we've since learned, and also to call up a few people involved in this podcast to get their perspectives on the legacy of Murph the Surf. Jack died of natural causes on September 12, 2020. His wife told the New York Times it was heart and organ failure, which a source close to Jack told us was tied to his diabetes, which honestly we never even knew he had. The news came as a shock to me, as well as the rest of us who worked on this podcast. My co-producer Anthony didn't believe me at first. Jack just seemed so vibrant, and while this podcast hadn't gone the way he wanted, it did seem like he was on his way to getting another moment in the spotlight. Shortly before Jack's death, Deadline broke the news that Emmy Award-winning director R.J. Cutler was set to make a 4-part documentary on Murph's life. Ron Howard was actually involved as well. I haven't been able to find out much about the documentary, if they shot enough footage before Jack passed to still make it. But for Jack at least, he died with his dream of the movie about his life, the quote-unquote right movie, still possibly being made. As to how I felt when I heard the news, well, that's complicated. So I called up some other people who have gotten close to this story to see how they were processing it. I started with Corey Kilgannon, the reporter who wrote a retrospective on the Star of India heist for the New York Times. A quick note before we begin, this episode does have explicit language, and it may not be appropriate for kids. Okay, let's get to my call with Corey. It started with me asking him how he felt when he heard the news about Jack.
Well, I was surprised because he's such a youthful guy, and I think it was a surprise to even his family. He was sharp as a tack. And his mind. The guy knows so much about so much that I was surprised to hear that.
Corey actually spoke to Jack's widow, Kitten, after Murph's death. Murph had never connected me with his wife when we were down in Florida, and despite Anthony and I being in town for a week, he made a point not to let us speak with her, or anyone else in the family.
When we were speaking, she had someone at the front porch knocking on the door, and she had to get off. But she said a lot of people were calling, and she was just like flooded with phone calls about it. More, he had articles about him all along over the years, but I think there was kind of a surge in it over the past year or two, and he was probably. I mean, I think you know how much he loved to talk about himself.
For those of us reporters who cover Jack Murphy, and this talk with Corey is no exception, the default mode of conversation is to immediately start trading war stories. I think that is what I will remember most about this story and most about Jack Murphy is it sounded like 100% bullshit and 80% was true, actually, instead of it being 20% true, which is usually what happens when someone sounds like they're bullshitting at you. 10% turns out to be true. With Jack, more was true than wasn't.
Right. Yeah. And stuff that was almost implausible, both his knowledge of stuff, whether it was this kind of arcane, really detailed knowledge, and then you Google it on the side, you're like, Jesus, the guy's right, or, stuff that he did. And you'd be like, wow, I just found a clip that he was the surfing champ of whatever, East Coast, blah, whatever. So that once you start from a level of like, oh, this guy is just kind of like, it's like bar talk, it's like, and then you start seeing how right a lot of the stuff is. It almost like starts getting you this level of credibility where you start saying, well, maybe he doesn't lie. Maybe he's not a liar.
I then told Corey about the last conversation I had with Jack, and how even in our final talk, he gave me one last unforgettable surprise. He started telling this absolutely ridiculous story, which was the most implausible story I've ever heard in my life, about a guy who he met in prison who planned a helicopter heist with him where they would parachute in, and then that guy after prison tried to rat him out to the FBI, but he had an accident where he was decapitated in a boating accident. You might remember this story from episode 8, the story about Catania. And we did all this research, and then during the fact check, he was like, no, you have his name spelled wrong. It's spelled this way. And I looked it up, and it was all freaking true. There was a Life magazine article about it. That really happened. Jack had pronounced the guy's name Catania, but it was spelled Cattano, Catano. We'd searched for days for Catania and found nothing. But on that final call, he spelled it for me, and I looked it up, and there it was. He'd 100% been telling the truth. It was only after that I asked him about Boston, that everything went to hell. And then it was just this little slip up he made about Boston where he took his friend's story and kind of appropriated it as his own, and that was when he lost it.
Amazing, though, that he would lose it over that, because, I mean, you weren't accusing him of a murder or anything, right? You were just accusing him of saying he did something that he didn't do. I mean, actually, it was the other thing, right? I mean, it wasn't a horrible thing that you were calling him on.
I was
right?
calling him on not committing a murder that he had intimated that he had committed, which he didn't actually, which is so...
I mean, this guy must have spent decades just telling tales, whether it's at a bar or it's in a prison, or, everyone knows Murph's the Surf and follows him around. And it's just like, that must have been like just the currency he dealt with. It's just stories and stories about Murph, and just old Murph stories coming out of him.
How will you remember Jack Murphy?
Just as like, a guy whose like life was just almost incomprehensible, and like all the stuff that he claimed to do and probably did, and almost all of it, from tennis player to symphonic violin, and amazing jewel thief, cat burglar, surfer, champion surfer. I mean, come on, you wouldn't even, if you made it up, it wouldn't be believed.
After I talked to Corey, I called up Meryl Gordon, who wrote about Jack for Vanity Fair back in 2014. Our friend Jack passed away.
I was really sad to read about his death because he was such a character and force of nature. You somehow thought he would go on forever. And it also means that the three of them who were involved in all of this are gone. So it's really, turning out the lights on history.
It is. It's, I always wondered if maybe he would, because he didn't come clean with me.
I have hours and hours of tape with him, and I did an FOI for his prison years.
FOI stands for the Freedom of Information Act. Meryl had made a request for his public records.
And it's been interesting to see the reactions, because everybody has a little bit of, was this conversion real or was it really manipulative? And I think it was probably a little bit of both. He figured the only way he was going to get out would be to find religion. But he did do a certain amount of good when he got out, but it's really hard to measure that against murdering somebody.
These are the questions I think all of us who covered Jack are left with. How much was real? How sorry he truly felt, if he felt sorry at all. And why a man who was so clearly trying to put something behind him couldn't help himself by talking to people like us.
Jack loved reporters. There was nothing Jack loved more than talking to reporters. I mean, you can see, dozens and dozens of articles over the years in which he is both trying to sort of self-aggrandizing, but at the same time, I think trying to make up for what he had done. I mean, trying to do something positive for other people. That there's that whole question: should you be judged by the worst thing you ever did in your life? When it's murder.
We also talked about the feelings we had when we heard the news of his death. Feelings I still struggle to put into words. Hearing the news was strange for me. I'll be honest, just because, this was a guy who, for better or worse, and however badly it ended, someone I spent a lot of time with and a lot of time thinking about.
No, I had the same reaction. It felt like a blow. I mean, when Alan Kuhn died, I felt the same way, because I had actually spoken to Alan Kuhn a week before. He had called me with some kind of wackadoodle theory, but we'd had a nice conversation. And there's something about when you write these stories and you get involved with these folks. I feel like do we need a support group for people who interviewed Jack Murphy? That we were all sort of charmed and confused, a little bit threatened, a little bit curious, but actually a lot curious, and that that he stayed with you. And he will stay with us.
In order to be fair to Jack, I wanted to call up someone close to him. So I reached out to Eddie Siebert, Jack's friend and the former CEO of Bill Glass Ministries. Eddie had actually been one of the people I spoke to the day I learned about Jack's death, but I called him back, this time with the recorder on.
So what else do you need to know?
Well, I wish I had recorded our conversation when we talked, because you confirmed the news for me, and I was just so shocked by it. But I'm wondering how you're processing it now and how you're feeling about Jack.
Oh, no different than I talked to you before, I guess. I loved him so. Hey, what else can I tell you? And in fact, Cindy and I were talking about this before, that I have been so blessed in my life to see so many lives changed by faith. And at the top of that list is Jack.
And you truly believe his life was changed?
Oh, no question.
When I pushed Eddie on this, he told me about the time after both he and Jack had stepped away from Bill Glass Ministries, and Jack was without work.
And I got to tell you that during that time span, I would have hired him and paid him a lot of money to represent my company. But that wasn't his calling. He continued to do prison ministry. And they scraped by because that was his calling.
I also told Eddie about my last conversation with Jack and how it had ended poorly. I'm still a little confused how I feel about old Jack Murphy. And maybe that's just the way it's going to be with me.
Hey, hey, I understand. And either people are going to believe in the healing faith in Jesus Christ or they won't.
And in the end, I guess, what else can you say? Eddie Siebert's a smart, kind, successful man. And who am I to doubt what he believes?
I sat next to Jeb Bush when we were on a Florida weekend while I was CEO. And Jack was speaking. And Jeb Bush was very impressed. And he turned to me, and I'll never forget this till the day I die. He said, "Eddie, is this guy for real?" And I said, "You betcha." So for whatever that's worth, you got my opinion.
I think that's a good way to end it, Eddie.
There you go.
I appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate how welcoming you were to us.
Hey, we appreciate you. No kidding. We are privileged and honored to have met you. Please honor his life, no matter how you want to put it. Because no matter what else he did, he tried to make up for what he did that was bad. And maybe that's what people need to remember.
There's one more person you all need to hear from, however. That's Inez Lyles, the stepsister of Annalie Marie Moan. After the last episode came out, Inez wrote me an email, which she gave me permission to read for this. "Nate," she wrote, "I just finished the last episode. Thank you for this story. I shed more tears for the life my sister could have lived. Your last note was a relief. An evil man can no longer exist to con and murder people anymore. Thank you so much for the story, as well as helping me locate my stepmom. I spoke with her a day after you gave me her phone number. Thank you for letting him destroy himself by his own words and demeanor. Sincerely, Inez Lyles." The Sneak is a production of For the Win and USA Today. It is written and produced by myself, along with Anthony Pacillo. Our field recordist is Gustavo Moeller, and our music supervisor and audio engineer is Claire Morgan of Notterly. Researched by Emily Lacaze. Video and image work from Emmanuel Lozano and Alyssa Williams. Our executives are Mark Hyland, Scott Stein, and Kate Gutman. Special thanks to the USA Today podcast squad, Shannon Green and Claire Thornton, and the crew at Wondery, especially our marketing wizard, Alex Carpenter. Additional thanks to the investigative team at the Naples Daily News for their help with reporting, and the amazing team at Miami-Dade College's Wolfson Archives, who provided our archival footage.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out these other videos from USA Today to stay up to date with all the latest news.